The airport was a paradox of chaos and monotony, a place where the rush of departures and arrivals blended into a dull, continuous drone. Nicholas Reed moved through the terminal with the practiced ease of a man who had spent most of his adult life on the move. He was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, the kind that spoke of success and control, with every detail meticulously arranged, from the polished leather shoes to the crisp white shirt beneath his jacket. But beneath the surface of this composed exterior, Nicholas was restless, though he couldn't pinpoint why. He had long since learned to ignore the fleeting sensations of unease. His life was a series of carefully calibrated decisions, each one building upon the last like the precise gears of a clock. He had been heading to New York for another routine business trip, the details of which he had reviewed a dozen times in his head. But as he approached his gate, something in the air made him slow his pace, a sense of foreboding that tightened around his chest. Nicholas checked his watch, frowning at the time. His flight was on schedule, yet he felt an inexplicable urge to linger. He scanned the bustling terminal, taking in the sights of hurried travelers, each absorbed in their own world. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw her. She stood by a small coffee kiosk, her back to him, but Nicholas would have recognized that silhouette anywhere. His breath caught as he took in the dark, shoulder-length hair that fell in soft waves, streaked now with strands of silver. Her posture was upright but not stiff, and there was a quiet grace in the way she moved. It had been 18 years, but time had not erased the familiarity of Christina. Christina, Nicholas whispered to himself, the name hanging in the air like a ghost. He hadn't spoken it aloud in years, not since he had left everything behind. His feet seemed to move of their own accord, carrying him closer to her, though part of him wanted to turn and flee. But as he drew nearer, something else caught his attention. The girl standing beside Christina, a young woman with the same dark hair, pulled into a loose ponytail, and eyes that were a startlingly deep shade of green. She had an air of casual confidence about her, the kind of effortless poise that comes with youth, but it was the resemblance to himself that stopped Nicholas in his tracks. The shape of her jaw, the set of her brows, there was no denying it. This was his daughter. He stopped a few feet away, his heart hammering in his chest. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, leaving him momentarily breathless. How had he not known? How had Christina kept this from him? A whirlwind of emotions surged within him: regret, anger, disbelief, but overriding them all was a deep, gnawing guilt. Nicholas felt rooted to the spot, unable to tear his eyes away from the girl. He had missed everything: her birth, her childhood, every milestone that marked her journey to adulthood. And now, here she was, standing just a few feet away from him, oblivious to the storm brewing in the mind of the man who had given her half of her genetic makeup. The girl turned her head slightly, her gaze drifting lazily across the terminal until it landed on Nicholas. For a split second, their eyes met, and Nicholas felt a jolt of recognition pass between them. It was as though the world narrowed to just the two of them in that moment. But just as quickly as it began, it ended. The girl, Anna, he thought, the name suddenly coming to him, looked away, clearly uninterested in the stranger she had just locked eyes with. Nicholas took a hesitant step forward, words forming on his lips, but he couldn't bring himself to speak. What could he possibly say? His throat felt tight, his mind spinning with the weight of everything he had lost, everything he had thrown away. As he hesitated, Christina turned toward Anna, handing her a cup of coffee. Nicholas saw the way she smiled at their daughter, a small, warm smile that reached her eyes. It was a smile he remembered well, one that had once been reserved for him. His chest tightened with the memory, with the realization of what could have been. Summoning every ounce of courage he had, Nicholas took another step forward. This time, Christina caught sight of him, her gaze meeting his over the rim of her coffee cup. For a heartbeat, she froze, the color draining from her face as recognition set in. Her eyes widened, and Nicholas could see 1,000 emotions flicker across her features: shock, anger, pain, and something else, something like sorrow. "Nicholas?" Her voice was barely more than a whisper, the name escaping her lips like an exhalation she had been holding for far too long. "Christina," he replied, his voice low and rough with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "It's been a long time." Christina didn't respond immediately. She glanced at Anna, who was now looking between them with a frown, clearly confused by the sudden tension in the air. Christina took a deep breath, steeling herself before speaking. "What are you doing here, Nicholas?" she asked, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of something sharp, something wounded. Nicholas opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. What was he doing here? Chasing ghosts? Seeking redemption? The answer eluded him, lost in the tangled web of emotions that had ensnared him since the moment he saw her. I didn't know," he finally managed, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know about her." About Anna. At the mention of her name, Anna's eyes widened, darting back to Christina in silent question. Christina's expression hardened, a protective shield snapping into place. "This isn't the time or the place for this," Christina said, her tone more resolute now. She reached for Anna's arm, gently steering her away. "We need to go. Come on, Anna." "Wait," Nicholas pleaded, taking a step forward, desperation seeping into his voice. "Christina, please. I just want to talk." Christina paused, her back to him, one hand still on Anna's arm. She didn't turn around when she spoke again, her voice tight and controlled. "You left, Nicholas. You made your choice. And now, after all these years, you don't get to just show up and disrupt our lives." "I know," Nicholas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know I made a mistake. But I need to make it right. Please, Christina, just give me a chance." Anna, who had been silent through the exchange, finally spoke, her voice sharp and tinged with confusion. "Mom, who is this? What's going on?" Christina hesitated, her grip on Anna's arm tightening for a moment before she let go. She turned to face Nicholas, her expression unreadable. "This is Nicholas Reed," she said, her voice flat. "Your father." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Anna's eyes widened in shock, her gaze flicking to Nicholas as if seeing him for the first time. "My father?" she repeated, her voice filled with disbelief. "You told me he was." "I know what I told you," Christina interrupted, her voice softer now, tinged with regret. "But we don't have time for this right now. We need to go." Anna looked at Nicholas, her expression a mix of confusion, hurt, and something that looked dangerously close to anger. "Why now?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "Why are you here now, after all this time?" Nicholas felt a pang of guilt, his throat tightening as he struggled to find the right words. "I didn't know," he said again, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "I didn't know about you, Anna." But Anna wasn't listening anymore. She turned away, her shoulders tense, and Nicholas saw the way her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Let's go, Mom," she said, her voice trembling with barely suppressed emotion. "I don't want to talk about this here." Christina nodded, casting one last glance at Nicholas before turning to leave. "Goodbye, Nicholas," she said, her voice heavy with finality. And just like that, they were gone, swallowed up by the crowd of travelers moving through the terminal. Nicholas stood there, rooted to the spot, his heart pounding in his chest. The bustling noise of the airport returned, washing over him like a tide, but he felt as though he were drowning in silence. He had found them, Christina and Anna, but in the space of a few minutes, he had lost them again. The weight of his choices, of the years he had missed, pressed down on him, leaving him breathless. But something in him had changed. The control he had prized so much had shattered in the face of this unexpected encounter, leaving him exposed and raw. And yet, for the first time in years, Nicholas felt something else, a flicker of hope, fragile and tenuous, but they're all the same. He wouldn't let them slip away so easily. He couldn't. There was too much at stake, too much he had to make right. With a deep breath, Nicholas turned and walked away from the gate, away from the life he had planned. His flight would take off without him, but he didn't care. His real journey was just beginning, and he was determined to see it through, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. As he left the terminal, Nicholas knew one thing for certain: he would find Christina and Anna again. And this time, he wouldn't let them go. Nicholas Reed sat in the dimly lit office of a private investigator, the room heavy with the scent of old leather and the faint musk of cigar smoke. It had been a week since the chance encounter at the airport, but the memory of Christina and Anna haunted him, refusing to let him rest. The investigator, a grizzled man named Jack Winters, sat across from Nicholas, sifting through a file with meticulous care. Jack was the kind of man who thrived on solving puzzles, and the look in his eyes told Nicholas that he had already begun piecing this one together. "You understand this won't be easy," Jack said, his voice a low rumble, like gravel scraping over asphalt. He looked up, meeting Nicholas's gaze with a penetrating stare. "Finding them, I mean. If they don't want to be found." Nicholas nodded, his jaw tight. He had spent the past few days in a haze of frustration and guilt, replaying the brief encounter at the airport over and over in his mind. Every time he saw Anna's face, so full of confusion and hurt, his heart twisted painfully. "I don't care how difficult it is," Nicholas replied, his voice firm but tinged with desperation. "I need to find them. I need to make things right." Jack raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. "Making things right after 18 years isn't a simple task, Mr. Reed. You might not like what you find." "I have to try," Nicholas insisted, his hands clenching into fists in his lap. "Whatever it takes, I need to talk to them. To explain. I need to know. I need to know what I missed." Jack regarded Nicholas for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're not just trying to ease your conscience, are you? Because if that's all this is, you might be better off leaving them be." Nicholas felt a flare of anger, quickly suppressed. "This isn't about me," he said, his voice low and intense. "It's about them. Christina raised our daughter on her own. She's been through hell, and I wasn't there. I don't know what kind of life Anna's had, what she's been through, but I owe it to her, to both of them, to at least try." Jack studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly. "All right. I'll take the case. But I'm warning you, Mr. Reed, you might not like the answers you get." Nicholas nodded, feeling a heavy weight settle in his chest. "I understand." Days turned into weeks as Jack dug into Christina and Anna's lives. Nicholas tried to carry on with his work, but his mind was constantly elsewhere, consumed by thoughts of his daughter and the woman he had once loved. Every day, the guilt gnawed at him, a relentless reminder of the years he had lost. Late one evening, Nicholas was at home, sitting in his study with a glass of whiskey in hand. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft ticking of a clock on the mantel. He stared at the amber liquid in his glass, feeling the sting of regret burn deeper than the alcohol. The phone rang, startling him out of his reverie. He set the glass down and picked up the receiver, his heart pounding in his chest. "Nicholas," Jack's voice crackled through the line. "I've found them." Nicholas's breath caught in his throat. "Where?" "They're in a small town about 2 hours from the city," Jack said. "Christina's working as a nurse at the local hospital. Anna's living with her, attending a nearby college. They've kept a low profile, changed their last name, even. But it's definitely them." Nicholas closed his eyes, a flood of emotions surging through him. Relief, fear, anticipation, all tangled together in a knot that tightened around his heart. Did you talk to them?" "No," Jack replied. "I thought it best to leave that to you. But I did learn a few things you should know." Nicholas's grip on the phone tightened. "What things?" There was a pause on the other end, and Nicholas could almost hear Jack weighing his words. "Anna's not just any ordinary college student. She's been dealing with some serious health issues." Nicholas's heart sank. "What kind of issues?" "Lupus," Jack said, the word heavy with implication. "It's an autoimmune disease. She's been managing it, but from what I could gather, she's had some rough patches. Christina's been taking care of her, but it hasn't been easy. Nicholas felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. Lupus. His daughter was sick, and he had been nowhere to be found. The guilt he had been carrying now threatened to crush him entirely. Is she okay? Nicholas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She's holding on, Jack said. But from what I've seen, she's got a lot of anger in her. And most of it seems to be directed at you. Nicholas swallowed hard, closing his eyes as he processed the information. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing it confirmed that his daughter was suffering, that she might hate him, was like a knife to the gut. I'm going to see them, Nicholas said, his voice resolute. I need to explain. I need to be there for her, for both of them. Just be careful, Nicholas, Jack warned. This isn't going to be a warm reunion. They've been living without you for a long time, and they've done just fine. You showing up now. It's going to stir up a lot of old wounds. I know, Nicholas said, his tone heavy with resignation. But I have to try. The drive to the small town was both agonizingly slow and terrifyingly fast. Nicholas's mind raced with every possible outcome, every scenario that could play out when he finally saw Christina and Anna again. He tried to prepare himself for the worst, but no amount of mental rehearsal could fully brace him for what was coming. He arrived in the late afternoon, the town bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun. It was a quiet, unassuming place, with tree-lined streets and modest homes. Nicholas felt a pang of guilt, wondering how different this was from the life Christina and Anna might have had if he had stayed. Nicholas found the house easily enough, a small, well-kept bungalow with a white picket fence. He parked across the street, his heart thudding in his chest as he stared at the front door. This was it. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to face the consequences of his actions. He took a deep breath and got out of the car, his legs feeling like lead as he crossed the street and approached the house. His hand hovered over the doorbell for a moment, his nerves screaming at him to turn back, to walk away before he did any more damage. But he couldn't. Not this time. Nicholas pressed the doorbell, the sound echoing inside the house. He waited, his heart pounding in his ears, each second stretching into an eternity. The door opened, and there she was, Christina. She looked older, of course, but still beautiful, with the same quiet strength that had drawn him to her all those years ago. Her expression was unreadable as she looked at him, a mixture of shock, anger, and something else, something guarded. Nicholas, she said, her voice flat and emotionless. What are you doing here? Nicholas swallowed, trying to steady his voice. I had to see you. To see Anna. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to talk to you. Both of you. Christina's eyes narrowed slightly, her hand tightening on the doorframe. It's too late for that, Nicholas. 18 years too late. I know, Nicholas said, his voice heavy with regret. But I'm here now, and I'm not leaving until I've said what I need to say. Christina studied him for a long moment, her gaze hard and unyielding. Finally, she stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. Nicholas hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his heart pounding in his chest. The house was warm and inviting, filled with the signs of a life well lived. Photos lined the walls, pictures of Christina and Anna at various ages, smiling and happy, but there was no sign of him anywhere. His absence was palpable, a stark reminder of the years he had lost. Anna's in her room, Christina said, closing the door behind him. I'll call her down, but I'm warning you, Nicholas, she's angry. She's hurt. And she has every right to be. I know, Nicholas replied, his voice barely above a whisper. I just want to talk to her. To explain. Christina gave him a long, searching look before nodding slightly. Wait here. She disappeared down the hallway, and Nicholas stood in the living room, his hands trembling slightly as he waited. He could hear muffled voices from the back of the house, Christina's calm, steady tone, and then a sharper, more agitated response from Anna. A moment later, They appeared in the hallway. Anna's expression was stormy, her green eyes blazing with anger and confusion. She looked so much like him, it took his breath away, the same strong features, the same stubborn set to her jaw. But there was also a softness there, a vulnerability that made Nicholas's heart ache. "What are you doing here?" Anna demanded, her voice shaking with barely restrained fury. "After all this time, you think you can just show up and everything will be fine?" Nicholas felt a lump form in his throat as he faced his daughter. "Anna, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I've hurt you, more than I can ever make up for. But I'm here because I want to try. I want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." Anna's eyes filled with tears, but her expression remained defiant. "You don't get to just waltz back into our lives like nothing happened. You left us. You left me. And now you want to play the hero? It doesn't work like that." Nicholas felt the weight of her words like a physical blow. "I know I can't change the past. But I want to be here for you now, in whatever way I can. I want to help." "Help?" Anna scoffed, her voice thick with emotion. "You think you can just fix everything with a few words? You think that's going to make up for the years you missed, for all the times I needed a father and you weren't there?" "I don't expect it to," Nicholas said, his voice breaking. "But I'm here now, and I want to try. Please, Anna. Give me a chance." Anna stared at him for a long moment, her expression torn between anger and something else, something that looked almost like hope. Finally, she shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nicholas took a step forward, his own eyes wet with unshed tears. "You don't have to decide right now. But I'll be here, no matter what. I'm not going anywhere." Anna looked at him, her gaze searching, and for a moment, Nicholas saw a flicker of the little girl she had once been, the daughter he had lost. She nodded slowly, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "Okay," she said quietly. "We'll see." Nicholas nodded, feeling a tentative sense of hope take root in his heart. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And after all these years, that was more than he could have ever hoped for. The days after Nicholas's reunion with Christina and Anna were a mixture of hope, tension, and uncertainty. The air was thick with emotions that had been buried for nearly 2 decades, and now, they were all being forced to confront them. The house felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were closing in, pressing them to face the past that had driven them apart. Nicholas had rented a small apartment in the town, just a few blocks away from Christina's house. He spent his days balancing his business remotely, but his heart was no longer in it. His thoughts were always on his daughter and the woman he had once loved. Every text message from Anna, every hesitant invitation to coffee or a walk, was a small victory. But it wasn't easy. The anger that Anna held toward him was still palpable, and Christina's guarded demeanor told him that forgiveness was not something he could count on. There were moments when Nicholas wondered if he was doing more harm than good by trying to force his way back into their lives. One evening, Nicholas found himself sitting in the town's small church. The pews were empty, and the only light came from the candles flickering at the altar. He had never been a particularly religious man, but lately, he found himself drawn to this quiet place, seeking solace in its stillness. He heard footsteps approaching and looked up to see Pastor Emmett, a tall, kind-faced man in his 60s, walking toward him. The pastor had introduced himself to Nicholas after noticing his regular visits, and over the past few weeks, they had struck up a tentative friendship. "Good evening, Nicholas," Pastor Emmett said, sitting down beside him. "You've been coming here a lot lately. I'm guessing there's something on your mind." Nicholas sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't even know where to start, Pastor. I've made such a mess of things." Pastor Emmett nodded, his eyes gentle and understanding. "Life has a way of getting messy, doesn't it? But the fact that you're here, trying to make things right, that says a lot about your character." Nicholas shook his head, the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. "I don't know if I can make things right. I abandoned my family, Pastor. I left them to fend for themselves, and now my daughter is sick, and I wasn't there. How do you come back from something like that? The pastor looked thoughtful, his hands folded in his lap. Forgiveness, Nicholas. It's a powerful thing, but it's also incredibly difficult, both to give and to receive. It's not something you can force or rush. You've made mistakes, yes, but you're trying to atone for them. That's a start. But what if they never forgive me? Nicholas asked, his voice raw with emotion. What if I've done too much damage? Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past, Pastor Emmett said gently. It's about finding a way to move forward, despite the past. You can't change what happened, but you can change what you do from here on out. And whether or not they forgive you, the important thing is that you're here now, trying to be the man they need you to be. Nicholas nodded slowly, the pastor's words sinking in. He still didn't know if Anna or Christina would ever forgive him, but he knew he had to keep trying, for their sake as much as his own. The turning point came a few weeks later, when Anna's health took a sudden and alarming downturn. It started with a flare-up of her lupus symptoms, extreme fatigue, joint pain, and a high fever that refused to break. Christina, ever the strong and capable caregiver, did everything she could to manage the situation, but it quickly became apparent that Anna needed more help than she could provide at home. One evening, as Anna lay in bed, pale and trembling with fever, Nicholas sat beside her, his heart breaking at the sight of his daughter in so much pain. Christina was in the other room, talking to the doctor on the phone, trying to arrange for Anna to be admitted to the hospital. Hey, kiddo, Nicholas said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Anna's damp forehead. How are you holding up? Anna opened her eyes, her gaze unfocused. I'm okay, she mumbled, though it was clear she was anything but. Just tired. Nicholas swallowed the lump in his throat. I'm so sorry, Anna. I wish I could take this pain away from you. Anna's eyes fluttered closed again, and for a moment, Nicholas thought she had fallen asleep. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Why did you leave? The question hung in the air, heavy and painful. Nicholas felt a wave of shame wash over him, knowing that this was the moment he had been dreading, and the moment he had been waiting for. I was a coward, Nicholas admitted, his voice thick with emotion. I was young and scared, and I didn't know how to handle the responsibilities of being a husband and a father. So I ran. And I've regretted it every single day since. Anna was silent for a long time, her breathing shallow and labored. Finally, she spoke again, her voice trembling. Do you love us? The question nearly broke Nicholas. He leaned forward, taking her hand in his, holding it gently. I do, Anna. I love you and your mother more than anything in this world. I was a fool to leave, and I know I don't deserve your love or your forgiveness. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Tears slid down Anna's cheeks, and Nicholas felt his own eyes burn with unshed tears. I just want you to be okay, he whispered. I want to be the father you deserve, even if it's too late. Anna squeezed his hand weakly, her grip barely there. I'm scared, she admitted, her voice breaking. I know, Nicholas said, his voice choked with emotion. But you're not alone, Anna. You've got me, and your mom, and we're going to get through this together. I promise. Just then, Christina returned to the room, her face drawn with worry. She looked at Nicholas and then at Anna, seeing the tears in her daughter's eyes. Without a word, she came to the other side of the bed and took Anna's other hand, squeezing it gently. We're going to take you to the hospital, sweetheart, Christina said softly. The doctors will take care of you, okay? Anna nodded weakly, her eyes closing as exhaustion took over. Nicholas and Christina exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever had happened in the past, whatever anger or resentment still lingered, they both knew that their daughter needed them now more than ever. The next few days were a blur of hospital visits, medical tests, and long, sleepless nights. Anna's condition stabilized, but the doctors were clear, her lupus was serious, and she would need ongoing treatment and careful management to keep the disease under control. Nicholas spent every possible moment at the hospital, sitting by Anna's bedside, talking to the doctors, and doing whatever he could to support Christina. It was a strange, delicate dance, two people who had once shared a life now trying to find their footing again in the midst of a crisis. One evening, after Anna had finally fallen asleep, Christina and Nicholas found themselves alone in the hospital cafeteria, nursing cups of lukewarm coffee. The tension between them had eased slightly, but there were still so many unspoken words hanging in the air. Christina broke the silence first. "You've been really good with her," she said quietly, staring down at her cup. "I wasn't sure how this would go, with you coming back into our lives like this. But you've been what she needs." Nicholas looked at her, his heart aching with a mix of emotions. "I'm just trying to make up for lost time," he said. "I know I can't ever really make up for what I did, but I want to be here for her now, in any way I can." Christina nodded, her expression thoughtful. "It's been hard," she admitted. "Raising her on my own, dealing with everything. There were times when I didn't think I could do it. But we managed. And now, seeing you with her, I realize how much she needed this. How much she needed you." Nicholas felt a lump form in his throat. "I wish I could have been there for you both. I can't tell you how much I regret leaving, Christina. I've thought about it every day for the past 18 years. Christina looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and something like acceptance. "You hurt us, Nicholas. You hurt me. But I've seen how much you've changed. And I can see that you're trying. That means something." "I am trying," Nicholas said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make things right, but I'm not going to stop trying." Christina reached across the table, placing her hand on top of his. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a lifeline, a connection that had been frayed but not entirely severed. "Maybe we can't go back," she said softly. "But we can try to move forward. For Anna's sake. For all of our sakes." Nicholas nodded, feeling a flicker of hope ignite in his chest. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd really like that." As the weeks turned into months, Nicholas, Christina, and Anna slowly began to navigate their new reality. There were still challenges, still moments of tension and uncertainty, but there were also moments of genuine connection, family dinners, quiet conversations, and shared laughter that felt like the beginnings of healing. Anna's health stabilized, and while she still faced a long road ahead, she no longer had to face it alone. Nicholas and Christina became a team, working together to support their daughter, and in the process, they began to rebuild the fragile trust that had once been shattered. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Anna turned to her father and said, "I'm glad you came back." Nicholas looked at her, his heart swelling with love for the young woman she had become. "I'm glad too, Anna," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm glad too. It wasn't a perfect ending, there were still scars, still wounds that needed time to heal. But it was a new beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Nicholas allowed himself to believe that they could find their way forward, together. If you like this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.